There was no Social Security in the Old West, no monthly check, no federal safety net waiting for you at 65. So when a cowboy's hands finally shook too much to hold a rope, when a miner's back gave out under the rock, what happened to him? That is the question this video answers. Not the gunfights, not the outlaws. Just one hard fact of frontier life. You worked until your body quit, and then the frontier decided what came next. Imagine a bunkhouse at sundown on a cattle ranch in the 1880s. Younger hands laugh over cards at a rough table. In the corner, an older man packs a single canvas bag. His hip has not let him mount a horse properly in years. Nobody fired him outright. The foreman just stopped calling his name at roundup. That silence was the whole system. No letter, no pension office, just a job that quietly stopped existing for men whose bodies had used themselves up. This was the ordinary fate of the working cowboy. So where did he go? The frontier gave old age exactly 3 doors, and every elderly person in the West walked through one. The first door was work, for as long as the body allowed it. Cowboys rarely stayed cowboys into old age, because riding a young man's job on an old man's spine did not work. But ranches still needed hands who knew cattle, and age brought judgment. An aging cowpuncher who could no longer break horses could still run a chuck wagon. When Texas rancher Charles Goodnight built the first chuck wagon in 1866, he created a real, paying job suited to men worn out by the trail. And historians note the men who took it were usually old cowboys no longer fit to ride. Cooking for a trail crew was actually the second best paying job on a cattle drive, right behind the trail boss. Other older hands became camp tenders, fence menders, or night herders. Miners followed a similar path, ending up running a boarding house or keeping books for a mining company. The frontier rarely offered retirement. It offered a demotion, if you were lucky enough to get one. The second door was family, much as it had worked for generations back east. If you had a son with land or a daughter with a husband willing to build a lean-to-room onto the house, you had shelter. Homesteading families often kept 3 generations under one roof, since an aging parent could still mind children, cook, and manage a garden while younger backs handled the heavier labor. This arrangement carried real legal weight. Property was frequently signed over to a son with an explicit understanding, sometimes written into a deed or will, that the parents would be fed, housed, and cared for until death. It was less a gift than a contract, but this door only opened if you had children who survived, prospered, and were willing. Disease, distance, and hard luck closed it for many. The third door was the one nobody wanted, the county poor farm. By the later decades of the 19th century, nearly every county in the settled West had some version of this institution, a poor farm, an almshouse, a county home. If you had no money, no family, and no way to work, the county took you in, and if your body could still labor, you worked the farm to help pay for your own keep. These places were kept deliberately bare, since reformers believed comfort would attract the lazy. Records from Illinois alone show that by 1903, all but 2 of that state's counties operated one, and the pattern held true across the frontier as territories built the same institutions their eastern cousins had decades earlier. Before a family ever reached the poor farm, there was often a gentler option: outdoor relief, small aid delivered directly to a person's own home, a sack of flour left at the door, a little firewood before winter, a few dollars from the county's overseer of the poor, an elected office that judged who deserved help. Widows well known and liked in a small frontier town often received this quiet assistance for years, keeping their independence and their own 4 walls as long as the town could afford it. It was charity, but it came with a face attached, a neighbor deciding another neighbor's fate. Here is my honest take. There is something almost admirable about a system where the person handing you help actually knew your name and history, but I would not romanticize it. Being judged worthy of survival by a neighbor's opinion is a brutal way to grow old, and plenty of decent people were judged wrong. Mining camps told the same story with different scenery. Clara Brown, a formerly enslaved woman who reached Colorado's mining camps in 1859, built a laundry business in Central City and used her earnings to grub-stake miners chasing gold. For years, that work made her prosperous. But by her 80s, her savings were gone, spent on charity and the decades-long search for her own lost family. When her body could no longer handle the mountain altitude, she moved to Denver and lived in a friend's home. A woman who had spent a lifetime keeping others afloat ended her own old age, depending on someone else's goodwill. That was not an exception. For camp workers without her earlier success, the same ending came faster and harder. There was a fourth thread underneath all of this, one that rarely gets mentioned: fraternal orders. The Freemasons, the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, and dozens of similar lodges spread across frontier towns as fast as churches did. These were not simply social clubs. Men paid regular dues so that if sickness, injury, or old age struck, the lodge would step in with money, medical care, and sometimes housing. By the later frontier period, close to a third of adult American men belonged to one of these societies. In towns too small for a proper poor farm, the local lodge was often the only safety net that existed at all. A member who had worked a claim for 30 years might spend his final years in a lodge run home for the aged, funded by men who understood any one of them could end up needing the same help. And then there was the one federal program that did exist, though it applied to almost nobody in this story by design. Union veterans of the Civil War and their widows could draw a genuine federal pension. By the 1890s, this program had grown enormous, consuming a startling share of the national budget. For an aging former soldier on the plains, that check could mean the difference between his own cabin and the county farm. But this door only opened for men who had worn Union blue and the wives they left behind. Everyone else, the miners, the vaqueros, the widowed homesteaders who never touched a uniform, had no such door at all. So this is the reality laid bare. An old rancher with sons nearby likely died in his own bed, surrounded by grandchildren. A lodge brother with paid-up dues likely spent his final years in a modest home built by his own society. A Union veteran cashed a government check every month like clockwork. But a woman widowed young on an isolated claim with no surviving children, no lodge dues, and no husband who wore blue faced a brutal set of choices. Beg the county for outdoor relief. Take a bed at the poor farm. Or, far more often than most realize, have nowhere at all, drifting between charity, odd jobs, and the mercy of strangers until the end. There was no Social Security check waiting for anyone in the Old West. What existed instead was a patchwork, sewn together out of family duty, lodge brotherhood, county shame, and pure luck. Some threads held strong, many did not. The men and women who fell through the gaps simply vanished from the record, the way the poor so often do. That patchwork held the country together for another 50 years after the frontier closed, until it broke under the weight of the Great Depression, and Washington built something permanent to replace it. But that is a story for another video. If you ask us plainly whether that patchwork was a good system, we do not think it was. It worked, in the sense that the country kept moving, and most people scraped by somehow. But it worked by leaning almost entirely on luck, on whether you happened to have sons, paid up lodge dues, or a blue uniform in your past. A safety net that only catches you if you got lucky first is not really a safety net at all. Think back to that older hand packing his bag in the bunkhouse. His whole future came down to which door was still open to him. A ranch that needed a cook, a son with land, a lodge with paid dues, or a county wagon waiting to take him to the poor farm. There was no fifth option, and no government check coming to save him from having to choose.